In a follow-on of my article that I did yesterday, Tobacco Ban State Files in Court, I can now give you the details of that filing and what was actually the argument of the state, coming straight from our Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. And in this article, there's an analysis of the court filings, and you'll find this extremely interesting. And for you to get these updates, please subscribe to my channel, click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when these articles come out, and also for my other videos in NDZ Has, Question Everything, as well as my playlists. I will link the article below in the details so that you can go and look at it. I do that with each of my videos, so please go and read through them if you want to look at the details. The headline of this article in Business Insider says, analysis, government has cited the science behind SA cigarette ban, but it doesn't add up, and it certainly doesn't. After going through the article and looking at the evidence presented, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma should definitely not have been given a doctorate of any kind, because I don't think that she can reason higher than a high school student at this stage. So the government has disclosed the science on which it relied on deciding to ban tobacco products during South Africa's coronavirus lockdown. In an affidavit, Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma appears to cite several studies showing a link between smoking and bad cases of COVID-19. She actually cites one set of statistics 3 different ways, plus some disagreement about what those numbers mean. So in the papers filed in the High Court in Pretoria this week, the South African government for the first time disclosed the scientific studies it says led to the decision to ban cigarette sales during the coronavirus lockdown. So at least now this can be scrutinized. In a 17-page affidavit in response to an action by the Fair Trade Independent Tobacco Association, Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma speaks at length about the harm cigarettes do generally and the near immediate benefits that quitting brings. So this is a health response. This is once again, she will provide no evidence that suggests that they should ban it because of the pandemic or because of the COVID-19 disease or because of the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. But let's see what she actually does come up with. Thanks to the high prices and reduced access to illicit cigarettes, a temporary cigarette prohibition should see a lot of South Africans quit for good, especially young and poor people, said Dlamini Zuma. So this is her aim. She wants people to stop smoking. That's the bottom line. And she has a right to feel that way. She doesn't have a right to force it on people. And people have the right to smoke as long as they don't affect others. And that can be regulated. But there is also reason to suspect a direct link between severe COVID-19 and smoking, she said, plus an increased risk of catching the disease in the first place for smokers. In support of that, Dlamini Zuma's affidavit gives the appearance of citing 4 different studies that found a link between smoking and severe cases of COVID-19, plus another piece of research that proposes a mechanism by which smokers could be making themselves more likely to be infected. Now I can tell you that any scientific study takes years to do, and often to verify the peer research takes even longer, and you need many studies from many people over a period of time to prove anything scientifically. So for her to say that the scientific evidence shows how much she actually understands science. In reality, she effectively cites one study of some value 3 different ways, and that study did not deal with smoking, but only happened to include statistics others could use to reach a conclusion. In other words, a study didn't try and see if smoking caused anything. It just included statistics on which people that developed COVID-19 actually were smokers or non-smokers, so that in future they can actually make a scientific evidence-based suggestion or conclusion based on their findings. But that is not available right now. The additional piece of research on the mechanisms, which Dlamini Zuma does not present as a study, turns out to be a letter which, if anything, undermines her case. And you will see soon why it undermines her case. This is what Dlamini Zuma told the court about the science behind government cigarette ban and what that research actually says. So study 1. Smokers may be at more risk of bad cases of COVID-19, but not everyone agrees. On 28th of February, well before South African lockdown, the New England Journal of Medicine published Clinical Characteristics of Coronavirus Disease 2019 in China. So the study specifically comes from China. Dlamini Zuma described it to the court like this. A large study of 1,099 patients with COVID-19 found that among the patients with severe symptoms, 16.9% were current smokers and 5.2% were former smokers. So I mean that adds up to 22%, which means that 78% of the people that contracted COVID-19 were not smokers. By far the majority. So in contrast to patients with non-severe symptoms where 11.8% were current smokers and 1.3% were former smokers. So what she is saying is that those were more severe symptoms, that smoking would make it more severe for you. In the group of patients that either needed mechanical ventilation, admission to an ICU or die, 25.5% were current smokers and 7.6% were former smokers. Once again, that adds up to about 33%. So 67% had nothing to do with smoking. Once again, by far the vast majority. In fact, more than a 2/3 majority. If a politician doesn't understand it, then they won't understand anything. They need a 2/3 majority in government to change the constitution. So I mean, 2/3 majority is a vast majority of people. The study itself does not deal with smoking at all, but it does include a table which lists the outcomes for smokers, non-smokers and former smokers with COVID-19. This was later used by others to reach conclusions about the link with smoking, but without clear consensus. It's clear that you cannot use a study at this stage, that a lot more needs to be done before conclusions can be drawn from a study that didn't study the risks directly with regards to COVID-19. It only gave statistics. That's all it is. It's a statistical report. In correspondence, it touches on the study, correspondence which Dlamini Zuma also cites in her court papers. Another research points out that there were very few smokers in the study cohort compared to the prevalence of smoking in China. The data shows a trend towards association between smoking and severity of COVID-19, but it was not sufficient. That is what this study says itself. It's not sufficient. The link was taken more seriously in the review, however, in another study that I'll get to just now. Study 2, 5 smokers died of COVID-19. Whoopee-ki-yay. The second study, Dlamini Zuma cites clinical cause and risk factors for mortality of adult inpatients with COVID-19 in Wuhan. So they're getting all of this from China. China, a retrospective cohort study was published by The Lancet on 11th of March. This makes me think all of these illicit cigarettes being sold on the market right now, they probably all come from China. And it actually served China's interest to actually keep this ban on smoking from all the normal legal traders in South Africa so that the illicit trade can flourish because China profits from it. She told the court that another study found that among those who were infected with COVID-19 and died, 9% were current smokers. 9% people, which means 91% were not smokers. How can she not understand this? Were the others car drivers, homeowners? I mean, what else should we ban? Living in a house, driving a car, eating chocolates. Where does it end? The study included data on 191 people, of which 11 were smokers. 5 of those smokers died while 6 survived. The study itself does not deal with smoking or draw conclusions, but it includes statistics on smokers in accompanying tables. According to a review also cited by Dlamini Zuma, in study 3 we'll get to just now, those numbers pointed to no statistically significant difference between the smoking rates of survivors and non-survivors of COVID-19, which is obvious. Okay, now we're getting to the study 3. Study 1 suggests smoking may be associated with bad COVID-19. Okay, COVID-19 and smoking. A systematic review of the evidence was published in the journal Tobacco Industry Induced Diseases. Tobacco-Induced Diseases, TID, on 20th of March. So this is quite a while ago. Dlamini Zuma's phrasing makes it appear to be two different studies when it's in fact one. One with original data and one review study. She tells the court, another study found that among the patients with severe symptoms, 16.9% were current smokers and 5.2% were former smokers, while the history of smoking was a risk factor of disease progression. A risk factor. There's nothing conclusive here. And then later says, a systematic review concluded that smokers suffer more severely from COVID-19, being 2.4 times more likely to be admitted to an ICU, need mechanical ventilation, or die compared to non-smokers. Both these references pointed to the TID article, which reviews 5 previously published studies, including the 2 studies Dlamini Zuma had cited already. Because the other 4 studies are of small groups, the review relies very heavily on study number 1. So heavily, in fact, that both the lines Dlamini Zuma cites in the affidavit are based on study 1's data. So as this article is trying to say, that everything actually comes from the first study. And these subsequent releases are all based on what they said. And they just basically came to their own conclusions from that. These aren't scientifically peer-reviewed studies at all. The effect is that Dlamini Zuma cites the same study 3 different times, which is actually pointless. But obviously she doesn't understand this. Study 3 and 4 is the only one that makes a case for a link between bad cases of COVID-19 and smoking, albeit guardedly. In conclusion, although further research is warranted as the weight of the evidence increases, with the limited available data, and although the above results are unadjusted for other factors that may impact disease progression, smoking is most likely associated with the negative progression and adverse outcomes of COVID-19. The authors write, this is not Dlamini Zuma, this is what the authors say. So they say it needs more study, that we need to actually look at this properly. But that's not evidence that you can put in court. And I mean, any judge that's worth his salt will just throw this out completely. Not quite a study. Asian men smoking may make them more susceptible, but there isn't enough data to be sure. The next headline continues. Dlamini Zuma also cites in an affidavit a piece of correspondence published by The Lancet on 11th of March, which appears to explain how smoking could directly make people more likely to catch SARS-CoV-2, the virus. So this is about contamination and spread of the virus. Remember, I said in my previous report that if this is not about the spread of the virus, she doesn't stand a chance in court, because she is stopping people from smoking during the pandemic and during the lockdown. She tells the court, one possible reason the smokers, she says, I mean, this is just suggestion, that smokers are more likely to end up in ICU is that smokers express the receptor ACE2 angiotensin 2 conversion enzyme 2 receptor. This is a receptor site for COVID-19 infections in the respiratory system. Because smokers have increased ACE2 receptors, there are potentially more receptor sites for the virus to enter the body. But there's no proof of this. People don't actually understand how this disease develops properly or what it actually affects. We actually have no cooking clue what's going on at this stage. We are only starting to learn now that autopsies are starting to be performed. New research, says the writer, suggests ACE2 expression, which could be linked to smoking, could explain why Asian men were apparently so much more likely to fall prey to COVID-19 than Asian women and men in other ethnic groups, because there's many Asian men that actually smoke. But a study had found no difference in ACE2 expression between smokers and non-smokers who were white. Only in smokers of Asian ethnicity did there appear to be a link. That is suspect, to say the least. The current literature does not support smoking as a predisposing factor in men or any subgroup for infection with SARS-CoV-2, reads the letter. This goes exactly against what she is using this letter for. Is she retarded or something? Does she actually understand what she's submitting in court? Her own letter suggests that there's no link between the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 and smoking. The virus. I mean, this is really scary. That the person that is heading this whole disaster pandemic response files this as evidence in court. that they are basing their decisions on this, that our President Cyril Ramaphosa cannot see through this, that he doesn't have the intellect to understand this, and that his government is an embarrassment, that the people that he has appointed to any ministerial committee and this NCCC council are buffoons. I mean, how on earth can they put this in court? I mean, the people taking the government to court must be licking their lips to actually start arguments on the 9th of June. I will keep you updated. Please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon so that you can get notifications on updates as we follow this case.